Hello, and welcome to the Post Talk Podcast, the podcast where we interview post-production professionals in the industry. Today I am joined with Joey Deanna. We go in depth about eye fatigue, building your own grading suite, and working in an ACES workflow. Here is Joey Deanna. Oftentimes, as colorists, we're in a really dark environment. You know, we're in the grading suite, and it could be a little maybe lonesome to times. Do you think it's important for colorists for us to get out, go for a walk, see what life looks like, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the big things that you really start to realize as you start doing more long form stuff, more looking at the monitor all day, every day, is your eyes can start to play tricks on you. You can lose your objectivity. You might drift as you're grading for a long period of time as your eyes kind of adjust. And there's a lot of environmental things we can do to combat that, but the more you look at the same image, the more your brain will subconsciously try to fix it for you. So getting out to I call it washing your eyes a little bit every so often and coming back with a fresh perspective. I'll find myself oftentimes, if it's possible, I love to sleep, come back the next day and look at a grade completely fresh, because you don't have any of the previous shots or anything else that you were doing or any of the environment in your head anymore. You're looking at it as if you were a viewer, and it gives you a different perspective on it.
Gotcha. Very, very cool. Yeah, I find myself, and I think even Alexis Van Herkman in his book, he mentioned it at one time. I was reading it the other day, how if you go out and you look at like the sky, for instance, it's very fascinating, and how people don't realize little things like different hues and in real life. I had a friend of mine ask me the other day, he's an aspiring DP, and he was like, hey, because you really got into color, do you like look at life differently now? What would you have to say to that?
I think you do. I mean, anytime I'm out anywhere, you're looking basically at the world for references, whether it be you watched a film, you saw some photography that interested you, you saw a color palette on a building or something. Anything that you see visually can influence you and say, I want to implement some of that palette for this creative reason somewhere down the road.
Right, absolutely. Because I think part of our job is the big part of our job, I think, is it's enhancing, what life is, and to a certain degree.
Yeah.
So we're gonna get a little technical. We're gonna start talking about monitors. So if you don't like hearing technical talk, that's okay. But a really technical question, and one that I have for you. There's like two schools of thought when it comes to monitors. I guess for when you're creating a grading suite, like at home sort of thing, and a lot of people like to have all their monitors, whether it's their GUIs and their reference, have all of them try to match in terms of color. And then there's another school of thought where it's like, I just want my reference to be calibrated. Is there a right answer? Is there a wrong answer to that, or?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, you're never going to get like your GUI monitors or your scope monitors to be color accurately calibrated. So I have my hero reference monitor and I have my client monitor. Both are very accurately calibrated, and everything else is set basically as dim as it can go, so it's as less distracting as possible. I don't want any like bright UI coming up and influencing me. And I can tell you, that is a big problem in some setups. I know a certain large network that did a build out of their facility, and all the edit suites had very nice, beautiful, calibrated Flanders DM240s in them, but they were sitting next to out of the box 38-inch Dell UHD UI monitors that were probably pumping out 300-400 nits in their default showroom torch mode.
Oh, wow.
Everybody was saying, why is the Flanders so dark? The Flanders is wrong. Nope, your perception of that monitor is being biased by your UI monitor. So I turn the UI monitors way down. I don't have any desktop backgrounds or pictures or anything on them that are anything but monochromatic. I even keep my scopes monochromatic. So I try to keep the amount of color distraction around me at a minimum. I keep the panel lights relatively dim as well.
Right.
And then that way the hero monitor is the primary focus. And of course the bias lighting makes a huge difference as well, because that will limit your eye fatigue. If I didn't have a bias light, having just the hero monitor as the only bright source of light in my field of vision, your eyes, we can consistently like irising up and down trying to compensate, because they don't know if they're supposed to be bright or if it's supposed to be dark.
Right.
So, yeah.
Interesting, yeah, because oftentimes when, like, if I catch myself going at it for too long, your eyes sort of start to play tricks with you. What once was looking great, you come back to it, maybe like it's the joke. You come back the next day and you're like, oh yeah, this looks terrible. What did I think? What was I doing? Which happens.
Yeah, and that's kind of a twofold problem, right? There's eye fatigue, which can be largely mitigated. Because there's two main issues at hand here. There is eye fatigue, and there is your brain adjusting. Eye fatigue can be addressed with a proper room layout. Neutral gray walls and proper bias lighting goes a gigantic way to making your eyes not get tired. Again, because your brain is not saying, hey, I'm in a dark room, I need to iris up. But then you look at a monitor and they say, hey, it's really bright, I need to iris down. Having that bias light to keep your brain neutral in terms of how much light it needs to bring in from your eyes really goes a long way towards eliminating eye fatigue. But what that doesn't eliminate is a tendency, whereas if you sit there and look at the same shot for 5 minutes straight and you're really getting into the weeds and getting into the details, your brain will start to adjust that shot to be what it wants it to be, and you'll end up kind of chasing your own tail. So I don't like to stay on one shot for a very long time. I like to go back, do passes, watch it in context, make small tweaks, watch it in context again, make more small tweaks. That way you're not adjusting, your brain's not adjusting to trick you.
Right. It kind of reminds me of like a long form workflow where you have, 500 shots you have to grade, and I think who was it? I don't know if it was Walter or somebody else, but someone said, go through and worry about just like the base first, and then come back and do like the secondaries, after that. It's like you're laying down.
It's like a sculpture. You chisel out the most material first, and then you go in and you chisel out more material, but much smaller amounts, and finer details and finer details and finer details.
Absolutely.
And to me, I like to get through that first pass maybe a little even quicker than most people. My first passes are usually really, really rough. I would never want to show them to anybody because I literally just fly through as fast as I can to get to the end. That way I have something that I can start playing down in context, because the context is where it matters more than anything, right? If it doesn't flow shot to shot, you might have one shot that is the most beautiful thing you've ever done in your career, but if the shots before and after it don't match at all, when somebody plays it back, they're not going to say, wow, I really like that shot. They're going to say, wow, this thing looked weird.
Okay, I gotcha. Yeah, again, luck form can be tricky like that. And it goes back to what we were saying, like our eyes will play tricks with us, and that's a great thing to note. Yeah, you start to end up chasing your own tail. That's a really good thing.
And it's about prioritization too. Like you go through, you need to touch every shot you touch. You're going to make a little bit better, right? And if you see something that you really want to focus on, drop yourself a marker in the timeline so you know to come back to it.
Oh, very, very true. It's kind of like that running joke, and I always wondered, I still wonder it, contrast. Everyone likes to add max amount of contrast. For some reason, people think contrast always makes things look better. What is your take on that?
It has to serve the creative. It's important to remember that the human brain does see detail based on contrast. That's why you really can't tell the difference between HD and UHD at any reasonable viewing distance. But you can tell the difference between an LCD and an OLED, just because the blacks are 10% deeper on the OLED. Your brain perceives sharpness based on contrast. Now, you can use that as a creative tool. That's the most important thing. How can you use that creatively to serve the narrative of whatever piece you're working on? If it needs to be really harsh and off-putting, you might want to clip those blacks a little bit and have really peaky whites. But if it's something a little bit more gentle and soft, you don't want to do that. And there's no rule saying you need to have 0 level black. There's no rule saying you have to have 100% level white. Or in the HDR world, there's no rule saying whites have to be at this exact nit value. It really depends on what division of the piece or the film is.
Right. Oh, absolutely. The other day, kind of like as an example of that, and this is more like me seeking advice. A friend of mine, he said he wanted to shoot a short film, and I said, "Cool, man." He wants me to grade it, and he hit me up. He's like, "Hey, should I put like a white balance card before every shot, so that way you can go in and white balance it?" And that kind of made me scratch my head a bit. Like, I don't know, is that something that he should do on set, or no?
I'll tell you what, it's not going to hurt anything, but it's also of limited utility, because that white balance card is only good for the light that's hitting it, not for the light of the entire scene.
Right.
And also, in all likelihood, I'm never going to see that because I'm going to be dealing with either a conform of the final edit or even a pre-conform of the final edit where everything's baked down into one file. I'll never see a test chart or a black and white or a black card or a white card or something like that.
Right, absolutely.
But again, it doesn't hurt to have, and even the most modern digital cinema cameras, you should be paying attention to white balance and lighting on set. When the Red came out, people were like, we don't have to white balance anymore. We don't have to expose properly anymore. We don't even need more than one lens because we can punch in because it's 4K. None of that stuff ever actually looks good, right? Lighting it well on set and then mildly bringing the vision to life in color looks good.
It brings me to my next question, which is printer lights. Some people love them. Some people just don't like to use them. I like to use them for balancing. But what do you think?
So printer lights are an interesting thing because I think it's a big misconception. I think a lot of people starting out grading hear a bunch of veteran colorists saying, oh, I only grade with printer lights. It's the greatest thing ever. It's amazing. And that's true. Most of my grading is done with printer lights. But the thing about printer lights are they move the entire channel up and down independently, right? They don't work on a normalized image, at least not well, because it'll pollute the blacks and pollute the highlights. They're not, printer lights and offset was never designed to be used on a Rec 709 image. It was designed to be used on something like a film scanner that was operating under another transform. In the film days, that transform would be the print film, right? Because the print film has its own contrast curve to it. So when you were doing printer lights as in actual physical lights on a color-timed contact print, right? You were timing the amount of red, green, and blue light that went through the negative into the positive. You were still working under the native inbuilt contrast curve of that print film stock. Now, in the digital world, that transform could be a simple S-curve to go from log to wherever your destination is. It could be a LUT, like a film print LUT, or a technical LUT, like the log C Airy LUT, or it could be something like a color space transform, but they all have one thing in common. They're adding contrast to that log image, and in usually kind of an S-curvy way. So when you use printer lights under a transform, your shadows and your highlights don't really get polluted, but on the other hand, you're doing a really nice clean balance of the whole shot. So yeah, if you're working on completely normalized Rec 709 footage and you throw printer lights on and you start trying to balance it, you're going to be like, what are all these people talking about? Why are my shadows now completely blue? But if you do it on a log image under a transform, you'll start to see it works really, really nice. And if you're in a color managed workflow like ACES, if you're working at ACES CCT, for example, that's all a log space. CCT is a log space. It's all log until it runs through the ODT and the RRT. And, the RRT, then the ODT. So that's the transform you're working under. So, yeah, printer lights, in my opinion, work really, really well under a transform. Not so well on just normal Rec 709 imagery. Yeah, I mean, a good exercise to do would be if you have some log footage and you were just going to use like an ARRI log C LUT on it, throw the log C LUT on it, try printer lights after the LUT, try printer lights before the LUT. You can see the exact difference in how it behaves.
Very good to know. You mentioned ACES. I don't really know much about working in an ACES workflow. Could you maybe kind of like go in detail a bit about that?
Yeah, ACES is the Academy Color Encoding System. I believe that's what it stands for. Someone from the Academy yell at me if I got something wrong there. But the general idea is it uses mathematical transforms with known data. So, for example, the camera manufacturer knows the photographic response of the sensor, right? The display manufacturers know what Rec 709 is, what Rec 2020 is, etc. So what ACES does, and you can do this with ACES or you can do this with your grading app's built-in color management, whether it be Resolve Color Management or Baselight or even like a Pablo or a Nucoda, they all have some form of color management that runs on the same theory. You take all of your known sources, log C, Panasonic Vlog, Red, etc., transform them into one really wide gamut, high dynamic range container. That is, in my case, usually ACES CCT. And then you grade in that native container, completely separate of what is the display transform, so what you're actually going to be showing it on. And then at the very end of the chain, you have a some kind of rendering transform to take this super wide gamut grade that you've done and make it actually viewable to some standard. But the cool thing there is, since we've abstracted both the source colorimetry and the destination colorimetry, the creative decisions in the grade are held in that wide gamut space. So if you grade in Rec 709 in ACES under a Rec 709 output transform, you know, you can switch that output transform to HDR, and it actually does a really good job mapping into HDR. You can switch it to like a P3 for theatrical, and it handles all of that stuff for you. And you can always go in and trim things creatively, because, you know, not all display formats are going to be perceptually the same. But the point is, you're not starting over. And a lot of places like the OTT providers like Netflix and Amazon, etc., will ask you for what's called a graded archive master, which is going to be that wide gamut space, whatever it is. It could even just be camera space, like log C. And then whatever output transform you're using, so they could go in and later on, if some new magical format comes out, then transform your grade to that without losing anything.
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I started watching Kevin Shaw's introduction into HDR. It really is like a mind opener, you know, and that's actually really good to note as well, because I've been hearing that word ACES pop up a lot and trying to connect the dots.
HDR is an interesting thing. It's important to remember with HDR, it's not like we just added more color or added more brightness. HDR, at least PQ-based HDR, is a fundamentally different way of encoding the image than what we're used to. And it's important to remember that when you're kind of figuring out your HDR workflows.
Yeah. The way he kind of, not to spoil it or anything, but one of the ways he describes it is like, imagine if you went outside and wearing a pair of glasses, and that pair of glasses told you the nit value all around you of everywhere there's like light almost. It's supposed to be like very lifelike, you know, in the way that we see like everyday life in a sense.
Well, the cool thing is it can be very lifelike. It can be more lifelike than standard dynamic range is, but it can also be unlifelike. It can be dark, it can be gloomy, it could be super bright and insane. You know, it's just more, it's a bigger canvas to paint on. And how you use that creatively is the hard decision, right? Learning to grade technically in HDR is not entirely difficult. You just need to know some concepts. Learning to grade creatively in HDR and what is right for what context and what works and what doesn't work, that's a lot harder, and that takes more time. And honestly, I think the industry is really evolving in that front. We've seen HDR grades on popular shows that run the gamut from insanely bright and poppy to the exact opposite, and some of them work really well, some of them not so much. But there's no one HDR look that is going to encompass everything, just like there's no one SDR look that encompasses everything. It's just, like I said, a bigger canvas to paint on now.
Right. We got more crayons to play with. One thing I wanted to get back to was creating sort of like a at-home grading suite, or like in general a grading suite. Oftentimes I hear we need the walls black or we need them gray. Well, I hear more gray so than black, but like, what do you think? I mean, I hear gray more so, but do you think black is not a bad color to have, like against your reference, or no?
No, my opinion on this, and it's, you know, to some degree, it's like asking, you know, who makes the best oil for your car. You know, you're going to get a million different answers from a million different people. But my opinion, and I think the general consensus is, one, mobile, one, synthetic. Two, neutral gray walls with a appropriate bias light for what you're doing. So if you're working in D65, which most people are, a D65 calibrated bias light. Again, this does two things. Like we talked about eye fatigue earlier, this greatly decreases eye fatigue. It also decreases any kind of bias. If you have a red wall in your suite, right, there's a concept called color constancy. And interestingly, we just learned pretty recently, some studies came out that humans develop color constancy around 8 months of age. And what it is it's the tendency for your brain to adjust what you're seeing based on the ambient luminance. As in, if I'm holding a red apple and I walk into a room that's primarily lit by green light, I still see the apple as mostly red. Because if it turned green and you're like a caveman, you would go insane, right? It's like an evolutionary survival mechanism. You cancel the dominant illuminant. Your brain cancels the dominant illuminant, and you'll see optical illusions take advantage of this. The blue/yellow dress was exactly that.
Oh, yes.
Different people in different lighting situations, their brain would try to cancel the dominant illuminant, and it would perceive them in different ways. That's why some people could even look at it in two different lighting situations and would look one way or the other to them. So the gray walls stop that from happening. There's nothing to cancel because the white point you're seeing all around you,
right,
from your bias light to your gray walls, is the same white point as you're seeing on screen. So anything that deviates from that white point is only going to come from something on screen, and then you're going to know that your eyes are better balanced for that they're not going to fool you as much.
Right. Interesting. Okay. I heard. I don't remember where I read this, but I heard once from a colorist what they did is they had their grading suite. Other walls were gray, right? But on one wall they left like a little like white point, like almost like a white like a circle. And when they would need to take a break, they would like stop and they would just look at that circle. You know, they would turn the lights on and it would kind of like a refresher almost.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's the same thing as like going outside and going for a walk.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I would say is anytime you do something like that, if you go outside, if you come back in the suite, give yourself 5 to 10 minutes to adjust. Because if you walk outside, or if you turn the lights on and look at that white card, and then turn it off, turn everything back off, go back to grading immediately, your vision's still gonna be biased towards what you had just done.
Right.
Give yourself time to adjust a little bit, whether that's in the morning, coming down to going to your office, drinking
right,
your cup of coffee, etc. Mm-hmm. You know, you don't want to just jump in. And back in the day, before like OLED monitors, and even now with some of the newer LCD monitors, but with CRTs or older LCDs, they really had a warm-up period themselves, where the colorimetry of the monitor would change over the first like 30 minutes of it being turned on. So that's why, you know, you would want to kind of sit and wait and get your eyes on your monitor to really be warmed up and be ready to grade.
Interesting. It's all about the prep. You know, you got to get yourself ready.
I mean, it's amazing how much work your brain does optically to keep you sane, right? Like, what a lot of people don't know is that you have 2 blind spots, one in each eye, dead center, where the optic nerve connects. Your brain has just filled in that data for your entire life, so you wouldn't know. But there's a couple of optical patterns that you can look at, and as you position yourself, you'll be able to see that blind spot in your vision. And it's like, holy crap, my brain is completely altering reality. Again, it's evolutionary, so it's for cavemen, so they won't go insane. But it really affects our perception of color. So when you set up a color suite, everything we do, from design decisions to lighting to colors, etc., is designed to stop those natural impulses of your brain to adjust your perception.
Interesting. Okay, that makes sense. Something I also wanted to touch base on was workflow. Oftentimes, I'm seeing it more often with short form, not so much long form, but more short form, getting preconforms in log. And so can you kind of touch base on like what that means and how is that like a good workflow?
Yeah, basically a preconform has been preconformed for you, so all of the full res is in, and you're looking at a flat baked file with all the cuts, dissolves, etc. in it, that is in hopefully log or whatever the original color was, and you're just color grading on that. It saves you a ton of time from doing your own conform or having an assistant do a conform. You can get basically right into grading. Usually you'll import an EDL to put the cuts in the right place, or if you don't have that, you'll do a scene detect. But it's a great workflow for a lot of projects, but there's concerns, right? You got to look at what the source footage was. You know, if you're getting 8K red preconformed and you need to do like a 8K finish, you're not going to want that.
Right.
But if you were getting red that was preconformed into like a UHD timeline at full premium, and you know that they debayered it all to red log 3G10, then you know you don't lose a lot by not having access to those raw settings, as long as the conform side did it right. Now, where it gets a little hairy is if there's fades or dissolves. Most software has capability to do that. Like, I mean, in Resolve, honestly, if you just put a dissolve across that dissolve, it'll dissolve the color with it, and it'll work nicely. But here's the problem. If it's a mixed format show, and it's dissolving from like a log shot to a Rec 709 shot,
Ooh.
you're going to want that with handles. You can redo that dissolve, because just riding the dissolve through a color effect, going from log to Rec 709, looks really bad.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So for a cuts-only log project that they export in a high-quality, 10 or 12-bit native resolution format, the preconform can be a great time saver. But there's a lot of caveats. But in a lot of cases, like I said, I do a lot of nonfiction work, so that means documentaries. And those documentaries mean a ton of ancient archive footage that's like SD and has been trampled on 100 times and like came off of Digibeta in 1999. That stuff, no problem preconforming. But what if we've got a bunch of interviews that were just shot on Red last week? Oftentimes, I'll have a preconform of all of the archive.
Right.
And then I'll get an AAF or an EDL of the interviews. So I'll be doing a true conform on the interviews that were shot on Red or on Alexa or something like that. And then all of the archive stuff might be a preconform to save time.
Yeah, that's really good to know. I see it more so with short form stuff, spots, things like that. I haven't really come across preconforms with anything exceeding past maybe like 20 minutes. That's where I start to see people needing the true conform more so often.
Yeah. Although, like I said, for documentaries, it's pretty common.
Okay. That's good to know.
Or for anything that needs a fast turnaround.
Yeah.
It's always like you kind of look at the options and you figure out what the compromises are and what the needs are. If the priority is a fast turnaround and they've already done the conform or they edited everything at full res and they need it like tomorrow, would you rather spend half your day doing a conform, or would you rather spend your entire time working on the color?
Right. Yeah. And does the client need it back, in like a round trip? That's also a good question.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those are some of the concerns. Ideally, I'd like to be on a conform workflow for just about everything. But there are workflow concerns that override that a lot of the times, especially for the documentary work that I do.
Interesting. So just finish off on my last question here. There's Resolve 17 is out. This is being recorded in 2021, and what are your thoughts on Resolve 17? I know it got a huge upgrade for colorists.
Yeah, I'm into it. The new HDR tool is really great, and it's really great in color managed workflows because it knows what color space you're working in.
Right.
It works nicely on the mini panel. Although the mini panel could use more trackballs now that we have like a billion trackballs in the software, but you can change between them pretty easily. Performance-wise, it's gotten a nice performance boost. A lot of stuff is faster than it was. Again, for the documentarian in me, they've added a feature that I have wanted for years and years and years, which is the ability to take a baked file like we were talking about, and if it has 3.2 pull down on it, you can now remove that and get a proper 24p source, which is really nice because, again, a lot of the stuff I deal with is like archive that was telecine to Digibeta in 1998.
Oh, wow.
So to be able to rip that apart, reverse telecine it, and get to a 24p or 2398 original frame-by-frame progressive image, that's fantastic. That's one of my favorite new features. I feel like Fusion has gotten a good bit more stable, which is nice. We all kind of knew that it was a big job to integrate Fusion into Resolve, and it was going to take a while to get it perfect. And it's a lot closer to perfect now, and having those tools in there is really useful even for color stuff because you can feed mats from Fusion into color. So if you need to do some advanced roto work, you can do it in Fusion, feed it into your color node tree, and you're good to go.
That makes sense. It's come a long way. I've heard a lot of people say that they don't want to use it as an NLE just yet.
I'm actually a big fan of it as an NLE. I'll do all my conform work, all my prep work in it, deliverables, stuff like that. It's a very fast, powerful NLE. I think a lot of people are just kind of scared to change how they work. But I'll say this: I've done a couple docs that were edited natively in Resolve.
Oh wow!
And you want to talk about a conform? They gave me a drive, and I opened up their Resolve project.
Right.
Talk about a time saver.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the benefits. When I hear people, oh yeah, what would I benefit from Premiere to Resolve? Well, workflow. Most importantly.